You scroll, you see everyone doing more. Everyone seems to be building something: a career, a relationship, a perfect version of themselves. And it makes you wonder if you should be doing more too. That quiet pressure slips in, that whisper that maybe you're falling behind. But what if you're not behind at all, just lost in someone else's timeline? We live in a world that makes comparison feel natural, even necessary. You see other people's milestones, and they start to shape how you measure your own. But the truth is, most of what we compare ourselves to isn't even real. It's curated, filtered, and detached from the full story. And yet, our minds absorb it as truth, setting invisible expectations that slowly rewrite what we think we should be. Before we start, if you find moments like this help you slow down, think deeper, or simply breathe a little easier, take a second to like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these quiet reflections reach. Now, let's explore why your life doesn't need to follow anyone else's rhythm, and how letting go of comparison might be the only way to finally feel at peace with where you are. The weight of comparison. It starts so small you barely notice it. A friend posts a photo of their new apartment. Someone else shares a video about quitting their job to travel the world. Another just announced their engagement, and the comments flood with hearts and fire emojis. You don't think you're comparing yourself. You're just scrolling, right? But a few minutes later, you feel it. That tiny ache somewhere between your chest and your stomach. The one that whispers, "Why not me? Why am I not there yet?" And I feel that too. Sometimes I catch myself staring at other people's lives, feeling like I'm watching from behind glass. It's not jealousy, not exactly. It's more like disorientation. Like the map I've been following suddenly stopped making sense. We were told there's a path: study, work, love, build, succeed. But when you start looking around, everyone seems to be walking a different one. And suddenly, your own pace feels wrong, your direction uncertain. The irony is that we were never meant to live in constant comparison. Our brains weren't designed to handle 1,000 stories at once. In the past, our village was small. We only compared ourselves to people we actually knew. The neighbor, the cousin, the one friend who seemed to have everything figured out. But now, your brain thinks the entire world is your village. You're surrounded by millions of curated highlight reels, and each one whispers, "You're not doing enough." That's the quiet trap. The illusion that everyone else is advancing while you're standing still. But think about it. Do you actually see their lives? Or just their best moments? You don't see the arguments before that smiling photo. You don't see the nights they stayed awake doubting their choices. You don't see the weight behind their success. What you see is the edited version of their truth. And yet, your brain compares it to your unedited one, your full story, with all its doubt, boredom, confusion, and pauses. Psychologically, it's called social comparison theory. It's hardwired into us. The urge to evaluate our own worth by looking at others. It helped us survive once. It told us where we stood in a tribe, who to follow, who to learn from. But in the digital age, it's like that instinct has been hijacked. You're comparing your real life to 1,000 filtered realities, and every one of them makes you question your own. There's something deeply human about wanting to measure progress. You want to know if you're doing okay. You want to know if you're living right. But here's the paradox. The more you measure, the less you actually live. You become so focused on where you should be that you stop noticing where you are. The present moment turns into a waiting room for a version of yourself you might never even need to become. And that's where overthinking begins. Not from laziness or confusion, but from pressure. You start analyzing every decision, not because you love thinking deeply, but because you're terrified of making the wrong move. You open your phone to check what others are doing, hoping it'll reassure you. But instead, it quietly tells you that you're still behind. It's a psychological loop. Seek validation, feel small, overthink, freeze, repeat. The strange part is, even when you know this cycle exists, it doesn't always break. Because comparison doesn't operate in logic, it operates in emotion. You can tell yourself, their success doesn't define me, but your subconscious still keeps score. The like counts, the comments, the engagement, they all mimic social approval, the kind our brains evolved to crave. In ancient tribes, approval meant safety. Rejection meant danger. So, when you scroll and see someone else being celebrated, your brain interprets it, unconsciously, as a threat to your belonging. But here's what that voice doesn't tell you. You can't be behind in a life that's uniquely yours. You can't be late to your own story. The timeline that makes you feel lost isn't real. It's an illusion built by visibility. The only reason you feel slower is because you're watching so many others run. But if you muted the noise, if you let your mind breathe for a moment, you'd realize you're not standing still. You're just moving differently. So many of us mistake stillness for failure. We think that if life feels quiet, we're not progressing. But stillness is where clarity grows. It's where new directions form. You can't build depth when you're running in circles trying to catch up to shadows. Depth happens in pauses. Growth happens when nobody's watching. Imagine for a second, if you could see your life like a book, every chapter unfolding at its own pace. Some pages might be fast and bright, others slow and heavy, but none of them are wasted. You wouldn't compare your chapter 4 to someone else's chapter 10, right? Because they're not the same story. Yet that's exactly what social comparison makes us do. It tricks us into believing all lives share one linear script. They don't. Here's a quiet truth. The people you admire are often comparing themselves too. The person you think has everything figured out might be scrolling through your life, thinking you've got something they're missing. We're all caught in this loop of distorted mirrors, each reflection shaped by insecurity, each image slightly warped. Breaking out of it doesn't mean pretending you don't care. It means learning to notice when comparison takes over. It means asking, is this inspiration or self-punishment? It means understanding that admiration can motivate, but envy can paralyze. And the difference between the two isn't who you're watching. It's how you feel when you stop. So, if you're listening to this right now and you feel behind, breathe. You're not late. You're not missing your moment. You're just in a part of the story that's still unfolding. And maybe, just maybe, the silence you're sitting in now is preparing you for a chapter that needs patience, not pressure. Because one day someone will look at you, your pace, your quiet, your persistence, and think you've got it all figured out. They won't see the doubt you carried, or the nights you questioned everything. They'll only see someone who kept going, even when the world told them they were behind. And that's the real progress, not catching up, but continuing, slowly, deliberately, on your own time. The trap of endless thinking. There's a point where reflection turns into a spiral, where thinking stops being a tool and starts being a cage. You know that moment, when you replay a decision over and over in your head, searching for the version of it that doesn't hurt, that doesn't make you question yourself. You scroll, you pace, you write notes, you open tabs, you talk to yourself quietly because you're trying to understand, to find that one clear answer that will finally silence the noise. But here's the twist. The more you think, the further away clarity gets. It's like trying to calm water by stirring it, and I feel that too. The urge to keep analyzing everything. Every conversation, every pause, every silence. It's not that we enjoy suffering. It's that overthinking feels like control. The mind convinces you that if you just think long enough, you'll find safety and certainty. But life doesn't work like an equation. The variables are always moving, and the harder you try to solve it, the more it slips through your fingers. This is the invisible exhaustion of intelligent people, the mental marathon that never ends. Smart minds don't overthink because they're weak. They overthink because they see more. They notice subtle shifts in tone. They sense contradictions in people's words. They read between lines that others don't even see. Their mind is a radar, constantly scanning for meaning, threat, and possibility. But when your awareness is that wide, peace becomes hard to find. Because you're not just living your life, you're observing yourself live it. There's a concept in psychology called metacognition, thinking about thinking. It's what allows us to be self-aware, to reflect, to plan ahead. But when it loops too tightly, it turns into self-surveillance. You're no longer just experiencing a moment. You're evaluating how you're experiencing it. It's like watching your own life through a delay, analyzing every frame. Did I say the right thing? Did they mean what they said? Should I have reacted differently? It's exhausting, and it keeps you stuck in mental rehearsal instead of real living. It's not a coincidence that overthinkers often struggle with sleep. When the world quiets down, your thoughts get louder. You replay what you should have said, what you should have done, what you wish would happen next. Your brain refuses to power down because it thinks there's unfinished business. That's the thing. Overthinking always whispers that you're almost done. Just one more thought, one more angle, one more mental check. But almost never ends. There's a cruel paradox here. The smarter you are, the more creative your self-doubt becomes. Your mind is so capable of seeing possibilities that it can imagine infinite reasons why you're wrong, or why something could go wrong. Intelligence amplifies uncertainty because it multiplies the number of ways things could unfold. So, while other people make a decision and move on, you're still stuck simulating scenarios that haven't even happened, and maybe never will. Some call it analysis paralysis, but that sounds too mechanical for what it really is. This isn't a malfunction, it's an emotional defense. Overthinking is your mind trying to protect you from regret, from failure, from humiliation. It's trying to keep you safe by keeping you in control. But safety built on control always comes with a cost, your peace. You trade peace for prediction, spontaneity for certainty. You start needing to know everything before you allow yourself to rest. You begin to micromanage life like it's a system that can be optimized. You analyze your relationships as if they were data sets, your emotions like variables. You ask, what's wrong with me? Why can't I stop thinking? But the truth is, nothing's wrong. Your brain is just doing what it was built to do. It's solving. The problem is that you've mistaken solving for living. And living isn't a problem to fix. It's a moment to feel. But when you've spent years equating understanding with safety, letting go feels impossible. You think that if you stop analyzing, you'll miss something. A sign, a clue, a hidden danger. Yet sometimes, the danger is the overanalysis itself. You drown in the possibilities until you can't see the simplicity of what's actually happening. That's why clarity doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from feeling safer. The mind calms when it no longer believes it has to protect you from everything. Think about the last time you were fully at ease. Not distracted, not half alert, but truly at peace. Maybe you were by the ocean, or driving with no destination, or lying in bed listening to the rain. Notice how your mind softened in those moments, how thoughts drifted instead of attacked. That's not laziness. That's what thinking feels like when it's not trying to defend itself. The brain isn't your enemy. It's just tired. It's been on high alert for too long. It keeps scanning the horizon for danger, even when none is there. Overthinkers often grew up in environments where awareness was survival, where anticipating the next move, reading the room, or being prepared was the only way to stay safe. So, of course, you learn to think ahead. Of course, you learn to predict. Your mind doesn't know that the threat is gone. It's still standing guard in an empty room. But awareness can be retrained. The first step isn't to stop thinking. That never works. The first step is to stop believing every thought is a threat. To realize that not every question deserves an answer. Not every doubt needs to be solved. Some thoughts are just weather passing through. Clouds in transit, not storms to chase. When you catch yourself spiraling, thinking about what they meant, what they'll say, what could happen, pause. Ask yourself, is this thought helping me, or is it just trying to protect me? That question alone can break the loop, because protection isn't always peace. Sometimes the safest thing you can do is stop guarding yourself and start trusting yourself. It's not that smart people can't relax. It's that they've spent so long being right that they've forgotten how to simply be. They've mistaken awareness for anxiety, depth for danger. But depth isn't dangerous. It's what gives meaning to everything. You just have to let it exist without controlling it. And maybe that's the quiet revolution for the overthinker. Not to think less, but to think gently. To let your thoughts stretch out like waves instead of blades. To let silence be something you rest in, not something you rush to fill. Because the truth is, your thoughts aren't the enemy. The enemy is the fear that you'll fall apart if you stop having them. You won't. In fact, that's when you'll start to feel whole again. So, maybe tonight, instead of trying to solve your thoughts, you can just listen to them fade. Not to answer, not to fix, just to remind yourself that your mind is allowed to rest. The world won't fall apart if you stop thinking for a moment. It'll keep spinning, and you'll still be here, breathing, learning, alive. Finally, not lost in thought, but found in stillness. The fear of stillness. There's a strange discomfort that settles in when everything goes quiet. You know that silence, the kind that creeps in right after the last message, the last scroll, the last distraction. Most people say they want peace, but when it finally arrives, it feels like standing in an empty room where every sound is your own heartbeat. The quiet gets loud. You start to hear your thoughts more clearly. And that's when the unease begins. Because stillness doesn't just expose the noise of the world, it exposes the noise inside you. It's in that silence where overthinking finds its true power. You try to rest, but your brain won't let you. It starts replaying old moments like a broken film reel, conversations that ended too early, choices you can't undo, people you wish you could forget. It's like your mind refuses to leave the room until every unfinished thought has been processed, polished, and put to bed. But thoughts don't sleep. They linger. They hover around you like ghosts of possibilities asking, "What if?" until you start believing there's something you missed. Overthinkers aren't afraid of silence because it's boring. They're afraid of what silence reveals. The brain, left without external noise, turns inward, and what it finds there is often chaos disguised as logic. You might start with something small, a memory, a face, a plan. But then it grows, splits into branches, pulls in emotion after emotion until the weight of it becomes unbearable. The stillness feels dangerous because it confronts you with yourself. But here's something that I've learned. The fear of stillness isn't really fear of silence. It's fear of surrender. It's the fear of losing control over what happens in your own head. The modern world taught us that stillness is unproductive, that being idle means you're falling behind. So when you sit quietly, your mind doesn't see peace. It sees threat. It thinks, we're wasting time. We should be solving, doing, moving. But sometimes doing nothing is the solution. Stillness is not the absence of progress. It's the space where perspective grows. Think about the ocean again. The surface is always moving, churning, glittering. But deep down, it's calm, slow, ancient. That depth isn't dead. It's where all the life begins. Overthinking keeps you trapped at the surface, constantly reacting to every wave. Stillness invites you deeper. It feels unnatural at first, uncomfortable, even frightening, because it strips you of the illusion of control. When you're no longer analyzing, no longer predicting, you have to sit with uncertainty. And for people who have spent their lives surviving through anticipation, uncertainty feels like danger. This is where fear disguises itself as logic. You tell yourself, I'm just trying to understand. But what you're really trying to do is avoid feeling. Overthinking is a way of staying above emotion, turning pain into a puzzle. It feels safer to dissect a feeling than to actually feel it. You create distance between yourself and the wound by turning it into data, language, thought. But no matter how much you analyze a wound, you can't think it into healing. You have to feel it into healing. That's why stillness matters. It's not just quiet, it's honesty. When everything else fades away, you finally meet yourself without the noise, without the commentary. The sadness you've been avoiding, the longing you've been suppressing, the exhaustion you've been masking with productivity, they all rise to the surface. And it's uncomfortable because it's real. But reality, no matter how heavy, is always lighter than illusion. In therapy, they call this the window of tolerance. It's the range where your nervous system feels safe enough to process emotion without shutting down or spiraling. Overthinkers live outside that window. Their thoughts are a form of control, an attempt to regulate emotions they were never taught to sit with. So when silence arrives, the mind panics. It says, do something, think, plan, analyze. But what if the bravest thing you could do is not think? What if surrendering to the stillness isn't weakness, but a way of saying to your mind, you don't have to protect me anymore? Stillness isn't emptiness, it's clarity. The moment you stop fighting your thoughts, they stop fighting you. And in that quiet, you finally remember. Peace was never missing. You were just too loud to hear it. If you made it here, take a breath. You don't need to hold on so tightly anymore. The thoughts will keep coming. The world will keep spinning, but you can choose to step out of its rhythm. If this session helped you slow down, or if it made you think a little differently, leave a like to let me know. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing this little quiet community grow from every corner of the world. And if you want more moments like this, soft reflections for the mind, thoughts to fall asleep to, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one. For now, let your mind rest. Let the noise fade. You're allowed to stop trying for a while. You're allowed to just be. Good night, and thank you for being here.